Looking back, it's easier to see everything with 100% clarity. I suppose I should have suspected something when my wife first came home from her job at the art gallery, excited about a new visitor. But when you completely trust someone, and after 17 years together, she had never once given me any reason to doubt her, your instinct is to give them the benefit of the doubt. That instinct, as it turns out, was wrong. Very wrong. My name is Bobby Sprague, and my wife's name is Tracy. We met at a small Midwestern university 18 years ago, started dating 17 years ago, and got married 16 years ago. 14 years ago, our daughter was born, and 12 years ago, we welcomed our son. I work as a programmer for a government agency. I earn a decent living, not a fortune, but enough. It was sufficient for Tracy to stay home while the kids were little. But 2 years ago, she decided the kids were old enough for her to spread her wings, so she took a 30-hour-week job at a prestigious art gallery in the city. Tracy had majored in art in college, so the job posed no intellectual challenge for her. She could speak about anything and go anywhere with confidence. The gallery primarily catered to clients whose financial standing was a bit better than ours. We live in a large Midwestern city, and there are plenty of people with that kind of wealth to keep the gallery's business thriving. Because of her job, Tracy managed to befriend some of these people and briefly immerse herself in their world before returning home to our everyday life. Occasionally, I got a glimpse of that world, too, as Tracy sometimes worked at the gallery's major exhibitions, and I would join her as her helper. I have to admit, it was thrilling to spend a few hours in the company of influential people. For a computer geek like me, it's not every day you get to mingle with CEOs, politicians, lawyers, and bank presidents. Every so often, Tracy would come home in high spirits after meeting a celebrity or someone influential. The kids and I would admire how she practically floated around the house for a while, but eventually, we learned to step back when she began to process where we fit into her life. Gloominess wasn't one of Tracy's better traits. The kids usually retreated to their rooms, leaving me to endure her biting remarks about our life for the rest of the evening. Most of the time, I just took it in stride. When I finally had enough, I'd tinker with my car in the garage. For the past few weeks, Tracy had been talking incessantly about some prominent real estate specialist who recently became a patron of the gallery. Jackson Aloysius Fairchild, a 28-year-old millionaire, had just moved into a pricey new apartment and, according to Tracy, wanted his walls adorned with artwork that reflected his status. It seemed he had left an impression on her overall, although she did mention he appeared a bit full of himself. In various conversations, she noted that he was handsome and well-built and frequently brought up his passion for activities like cycling and rock climbing. Tracy's enthusiasm about the new client wasn't unusual, so I didn't think much of it and let her chatter on for the next couple of weeks. As expected, the excitement eventually died down. I didn't hear another word about Jackson Aloysius Fairchild until I was introduced to him at the gallery's Christmas gala, just a few weeks before the holiday. I have to admit, he was an impressive physical specimen, about 6 feet 1 inch tall and built like a rock in his expensive Armani suit. He was also blonde, blue-eyed, and strikingly handsome, even by my admittedly jaded standards. I hadn't been expecting that. We spoke for about 30 seconds as Tracy introduced us, and in that brief moment, I noticed the way he looked at my wife, from head to toe, like a tiger sizing up its prey. To be fair, Tracy did look stunning that evening, dressed in a custom-tailored blue skirt and jacket. The subtle neckline of her white blouse hinted at elegance, but his gaze held something sharper, more calculating than mere admiration. Tracy seemed too caught up in the evening's events to notice, but I certainly did. Tracy went off to mingle, and I headed to the bar. I ordered myself a Jack Daniels on the rocks and found Kenny Taylor, the husband of one of Tracy's colleagues, whom I had met before and gotten along with quite well. We talked a lot about sports and cars. After chatting with Kenny for a bit, I mingled on my own. About an hour later, I noticed Tracy speaking with a small group of people, while Jackson Aloysius Fairchild was standing uncomfortably close to her, his body pressed against hers. I went back to the bar, picked up her favorite drink, and walked over to the group. Introducing myself, I handed Tracy her glass of wine. Then, quietly but firmly, I reached out to her right hip and removed Jackson's hand, which had been resting on her back. He didn't say a word, just smirked at me as he moved his hand back to his side. I stayed with the group for a few minutes before Tracy moved on to mingle with others. I went in a different direction, making sure Jackson wasn't following her. I expected to see Tracy going about her business while I wandered around the gallery, chatting with her colleagues. But after about an hour, I realized I couldn't find my wife anywhere. A quick second look confirmed that Jackson was also nowhere to be seen. My instincts kicked into high gear, and I set out to find Tracy. She wasn't in the gallery, so I stepped out the front door and began circling the building. Small groups of people stood in the parking lot, chatting in their coats and looking like they were about to leave, but there was still no sign of Tracy. Then, I noticed a couple sitting rather cozily in the back seat of a black Jaguar XJ. The engine was running, and the pair was pressed close together. I didn't stop to confirm whether it was Tracy and Jackson. I assumed it was. Walking up to the car, I opened the door next to the woman. The passengers recoiled in surprise, so I couldn't immediately tell if they had been kissing, but they were certainly close enough. "It's time to leave, darling." "Now," I said, using my best polite but firm tone. We were just," Tracy stammered as Jackson smirked at me. "I don't care." "It's time to go," I said, almost in a whisper. "Come on, Bobby, you've got to step in and hear this sound system," Jackson said. "It's absolutely crystal clear." The stereo was on, playing some kind of concert music, but I doubted either of them had been listening to it. "Another time, Jackson." "We really need to go," I said in my most indifferent tone. I helped my wife out of the car, and we headed toward where my Ford F-150 was parked. "Wait, I can't leave yet. The party's going to last another 2 hours. I'm supposed to stay the whole time and act as one of the hosts," Tracy said, her voice firm with determination. "If your boss has a problem with that, he can call me directly," I said. "What the hell do you think you were doing?" "We were really just listening to the audio system in his car." "It's incredible," she said, her voice carrying a hint of awe. "Aha," I replied, with not a trace of awe in my voice. Tracy continued to act innocent, and for the next couple of weeks, everything seemed calm between us. Eventually, I let it go, and life returned to normal. So, a few months later, I was completely caught off guard when Tracy told me she'd accepted an invitation to spend 4th of July weekend at Jackson's lake house. It was supposed to be us, Tracy's boss and his wife, and 2 other couples who were friends of Jackson. We'd arrive Friday afternoon and stay until midday Sunday. Jackson planned to grill both days, with a fully stocked bar, swimming, boating, and all the other amenities available. I started to object, but Tracy simply said, "We're going," turned on her heel, and walked away from me. The weekend actually started off wonderfully. We spent a few hours on Jackson's rather large sailboat out on the lake. All the women looked stunning in their bikinis, and the guys didn't look too bad either in their baggy swim trunks. Honestly, Jackson probably had the best physique among the 5 men there. Fortunately, though, he didn't look significantly better than the rest of us. As for Tracy, despite being the second oldest of the 5 women, she probably had the best figure. Her black bikini showcased her curves, her chest and firm backside, in a way that left little to the imagination, at least in my opinion. Jackson had an impressive grill in the backyard of his lake house, and even the refrigerator was fully stocked with beer, wine, and ice for cocktails. He brought out some marinated steaks and began laying them on the grill while everyone settled into chairs nearby, drinks in hand. Jackson was a gracious host and, so far, didn't seem particularly focused on Tracy, who, to my relief, kept a bit more distance from him than she had at Christmas. The night went splendidly, and around midnight, we all retired to our respective bedrooms. Jackson, being the only single person there, headed to the master suite. Saturday began with a visit to a small lakeside town. It was a charming little tourist trap with plenty of cute shops, and most of the women returned with a few purchases. We followed that with a lavish lunch of sandwiches and then headed out for a game of volleyball. The drinking started after we wrapped up that activity, and for dinner, we had sausages and pork cuts. We enjoyed another wonderful meal, and after sitting around for a couple of hours, Tracy's boss, Lou, suggested that he and I take a walk around the lake. Considering everything we had eaten and drunk, I thought it was a great idea, a way to prepare for the next round. It took us about 30 minutes to walk around the lake, and when we returned, the group was already seated around the table, sprawled in chairs and loungers. My mood soured when I saw Tracy sitting in a lounger, leaning back against Jackson, who had his arm wrapped around her waist. As we approached, Tracy smiled and slid off Jackson, but she didn't seem to be in much of a hurry, even though she must have known I wouldn't be pleased. She avoided making real eye contact with me but came over and sat in a chair next to me for most of the evening. Throughout the night, I caught her exchanging glances with Jackson several times when they thought I wasn't looking. Just like the night before, the party began winding down around midnight. As the other three couples started heading to their bedrooms, Tracy quietly asked me to join her in the kitchen. Once we got there, she looked me directly in the eyes for the first time that evening and announced, "Jackson asked me to spend the night in his bed tonight. I've accepted his offer." I must have blacked out or hit my head, because for a moment, it felt like Tracy had just told me she was planning to sleep with Jackson in his bed. I stared at her as if she had three eyes, and she realized I wasn't entirely sure I had heard her correctly. "This has nothing to do with love, Bobby," she began. "This is purely about sex. I've been completely faithful to you for 17 years, and you're the only man I love. But I want to sleep with Jackson. He excites me, and I want to know what it feels like to be with another man. After tonight, I'll be your faithful wife again for the rest of our lives. But I think you owe me this one night." I don't know how long I stood there, mouth agape. My wife had just told me she was going to sleep with another man because she wanted to, and apparently, I owed her that. "Over my damn dead body will you sleep with him?" I finally blurted out. "This isn't up for negotiation, Bobby. Accept it for what it is. Tonight, I'm his. Tomorrow, and for the rest of our lives, I'll be yours. Don't be so sure about that, sweetheart. Remember, every action has consequences." "Damn it, Bobby," she whispered harshly. "Do you have to see everything in such black and white terms? For God's sake, it's just one night. One night, that's it. And you're going to ruin everything over this? One night. We never thought you'd be this unreasonable. Maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut and gone behind your back, but I was afraid that if you found out, it would really be the end of us. So I thought if you knew and let me go, it wouldn't be cheating." She turned on her heels and left. When I walked out of the kitchen and headed to the living room, I saw Tracy take Jackson by the hand and lead him to the master bedroom. I think the blur in my vision was caused by the tears streaming from my eyes. I walked over to the bar in the room and poured myself a whiskey. It took me about 5 minutes to finish it, and when I did, I headed to the master bedroom and stood very quietly by the door. I could hear the sounds of two people having sex. My life, as I knew it, was over. I had a few more shots of whiskey, trying to figure out what I was going to do next. My first instinct was to leave as soon as possible and file for divorce. But the thought of having to temporarily part with my children didn't sit well with me. I couldn't see anything good coming from that decision, either for myself or for them. On the other hand, at that very moment, my wife was in another man's bed, and I knew I couldn't just live with that. A thought crossed my mind to burn the house down and take all of us with it, but sanity prevailed. Then, I think I blacked out for a while because, when I looked at the clock, it was 3 a.m., and the house was quiet. Staggering, I made my way to the bedroom assigned to Tracy and me. The bed was still neatly made, as I had expected, because it was empty. I lay down directly on top of the bedspread and slept fitfully for the next few hours, finally getting up at 7:30. I went to the adjoining bathroom, took a quick shower, and brushed my teeth before heading to the kitchen. The other three couples were already up, having scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast. Marna, Tracy's boss Lou's wife, seemed to be the main cook and offered me a plate while the others mumbled, "Good morning." From the sideways glances everyone was giving me, it was obvious they all knew exactly what had happened. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment because the humiliation was overwhelming. "It's okay, Bobby. We've all seen this before," Marna said sympathetically, while the others nodded in agreement. "Jackson's done this 3 or 4 times already. He's an alpha male, and when he sees something he wants, he goes for it. That's just the way he's wired. I also tend to think he really enjoys humiliating others, and I believe the women understand that too," Lou added. "But I don't think it's personal. It's just who he is." "So what happened to the other couples he's done this to?" I asked. "Well, as far as I know, they're all still married. When it comes down to it, it seems foolish to throw away a long-term marriage over a one-night stand," Marna said. "Especially when kids and everything else are involved," added Joanna, one of the other wives. "You mean he targets married women with kids so they can use their children as leverage for the affair?" I asked incredulously. "It seems that way," Ralph, Joanna's husband, chimed in. "But honestly, he's a good guy, aside from this one little quirk. I've known him since college, and if you're his friend, you've got a friend for life. So I can overlook this one eccentricity, especially since it doesn't seem to cause lasting harm to couples in the long run. In fact, I know that last year Jackson brokered a lucrative deal for his latest fling and her husband on a condo in North Carolina. Jackson can stay with them whenever he's in the area." At that moment, we heard moaning coming from the master bedroom. It was Tracy, and from the sounds of it, I realized that the night she had spent with Jackson had clearly extended into the morning. Everyone at the table flushed with embarrassment, while I turned pale with fury. "Why don't we have breakfast on the terrace?" Marna suggested. Tracy and Jackson joined us on the terrace about 30 minutes later, freshly showered and looking very pleased with themselves. I had to admit, Tracy was glowing and didn't seem to be making much of an effort to hide the fact that everyone knew what she had just been doing. She carried a plate of breakfast and immediately walked over to the lounge chair I was sitting on. She perched on the edge while I moved my legs apart to make room for her. At that moment, she had her back to me, but I could see how pink her back was under her tank top. I also caught a glimpse of what looked like a bite mark on her right shoulder, just below the strap of her tank top and bra. She didn't greet me, only nodded as she sat down, and I saw no reason to break the silence. "So, what's everyone's plan for the day?" Jackson asked in his cheerful host tone. "I think we need to head back and spend some time with the kids. Don't you agree, dear?" I said to Tracy's back. She hesitated for a moment, and from the way her hair and head moved, I could tell she was rolling her eyes at my words. It was one of those things you just know when you've been together as long as we had. Since she was facing everyone else, they could all see her rolling her eyes, and it took every ounce of self-control I had not to reach out and smack the back of her head. "I was hoping we could stay a little longer and maybe go out on the yacht again, darling," she replied firmly. "No. We definitely need to head back. Finish your breakfast. I'll load the car. We're leaving in 10 minutes, I said as I walked back into the house. I loaded the car in record time. Tracy was just finishing her breakfast when I returned to the veranda. I grabbed her wrist, waved a quick goodbye to everyone, and practically dragged her to the car. I didn't need to look anyone in the eye to know what they were thinking. I knew, because I was already thinking it myself. The first 45 minutes of the drive were silent except for the radio. Tracy mostly stared out the passenger side window. I think she was afraid that if she looked straight ahead and I caught sight of her face, it would trigger an explosion. So, she kept her head turned away from me. Eventually, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Was it worth it? I half hissed, half spoke to her. For a couple of seconds, she didn't move, and then I saw her take a deep breath. She turned to face me. Yes. Yes, it was. It was wonderful, she murmured, her gaze distant. Not exactly the response I was expecting. I wasn't sure what I expected, but I didn't think she'd tell me the awful truth. Maybe I thought she'd stammer, offer a half-truth, backtrack, maybe even apologize, but not the whole truth. And from the look on her face, I knew it really was the truth. 17 years, 2 kids, everything we've built together, and you threw it all away for one night? I asked. She turned a little more toward me in her seat and gave me a sad, almost resigned look. That's up to you, Bobby, she said. As I promised, it was just this once, and now I'll be as devoted to you as I was before last night. It was an incredible night, and now it's over. But if you can fall out of love with me so quickly and destroy our family, then you'll do what you have to do. But trust me, I'll take the kids, and I'll make sure they know you're the one who broke up our family. I was stunned into silence, not even an apology. And she would blame me for the breakup of our family? She and Jackson must have planned this all out carefully. I had never seen this side of Tracy before, and I certainly didn't like it. So, can I assume that this morning's round of sex with Jackson was a calculated move, made for the humiliation factor? I asked. Not exactly. He wanted to sleep with me one more time before I became my husband's faithful wife again. He's willing to live by my rules. We stopped by Tracy's parents' house to pick up the kids. When we arrived, it seemed to me as if nothing had changed for Tracy. Despite the fact that I got along very well with Tracy's parents, Ron and Judy, I could barely look them in the eye. I felt as though they somehow knew that Tracy had cheated on me, and I felt ashamed and hurt. I wanted to shout the truth about their daughter, but I knew this wasn't the time or place. Tracy had a puzzled expression on her face the entire time we were there. She was clearly enjoying my discomfort and the fact that she held the upper hand. This was definitely not the right way to make amends, I thought to myself. Tracy went to bed after me that evening. I was lying on my side with my back to her when she climbed in and positioned herself behind me. Then I felt her hand move to my lower body. After she stroked me twice from top to bottom, I turned to face her and slowly shook my head, refusing. Not tonight, I said. There's nothing you can do to make me get aroused for you. You'll just have to be satisfied with whatever that bastard gave you last night and this morning. For the first time since Saturday evening, Tracy showed weakness. She looked hurt, and shocked by my rejection of her advances. It was one of the few times in our life together that this had happened. But don't you want to reclaim me for yourself? Jackson says that's almost an automatic reaction for men in situations like this. Oh, he says that, does he? So he's not only a real estate genius but also a sex therapist. Well, then he should have warned you that some men don't see what you did as a sexual challenge. Some of us see it as complete betrayal, and vomiting might seem more appropriate than sex. Tracy's eyes widened even more than before. Never in all our 17 years together had I spoken to her like that, and I had never cursed at her before. She took her hand away, and I rolled over onto my other side and pretended to be asleep. I heard her quietly crying. I didn't care. The following week, I arranged a meeting with a well-respected divorce attorney. The meeting did not go well, to say the least. Marcus Rothstein had to explain to me twice that my options were quite limited: either give up half my stuff and lose significant time with my kids, or stick it out for the sake of the children and then give up half my stuff if we divorced once they reached adulthood. We all know parents who live their lives for their children, only to realize after the kids leave home that they have nothing left in common, leading to divorce. Essentially, that was the scenario my attorney laid out for me: be a good parent for the next 6 years and then divorce Tracy as soon as the kids were no longer a factor. At least in my case, I didn't have to worry about Tracy sneaking around, assuming she was truthful about keeping her promise. That's what I did. If my kids were involved in an activity, I usually made sure to be the responsible parent and ensured Tracy participated as well. Why should I be the only one attending a stamp club fundraiser or working on a 4-hour woodworking project? We became the model parents that everyone admired, and sometimes shook their heads at. As for physical intimacy, I hadn't touched Tracy in a sexual way for 6 months until she told me she'd have to seek sex elsewhere if I refused to fulfill my marital duties. Since I was on the verge of losing it, literally, I convinced myself that I could have sex with Tracy the same way she had sex with Jackson, just sex, nothing more. After all, she was still a beautiful woman. It's not like I was being forced to sleep with a troll. It wasn't very enjoyable, but our first night set the tone for what would happen over the next few years. We had a date at one of our favorite Italian spots, and I treated Tracy to 2 glasses of wine more than she usually drank. Since she hadn't had sex for the past 6 months except with her favorite toy, she was a bit more aroused than usual, and when I suggested we head to bed while the kids watched a movie, she didn't hesitate. As we undressed, we were like 2 eager teenagers. After about 30 seconds of kissing, I pushed her back onto the bed and gently ran 2 fingers over her lower abdomen. Then she moaned. It wasn't just any moan, it was the exact same moan we all heard at the lake cottage when she was with Jackson Aloysius Fairchild that Sunday morning. At that moment, something clicked in my head, and rage became my closest companion. Without thinking, I gave in to my emotions and took control in a way I never had before. The next 20 minutes were a blur of intensity as I channeled my anger and frustration into the act, letting my feelings take over entirely. When it was over, Tracy seemed visibly overwhelmed, her body trembling slightly as she caught her breath. We lay together in silence for about 10 minutes before finally separating. "Where on earth did that come from?" she whispered to me. "Good grief, Bobby. Am I going to have to wait another 6 months for a repeat performance?" I didn't have an answer to her question, so I stayed silent and turned my face toward her back. I must admit that every time I thought about Tracy with Jackson, I became furious, and there was nothing tender about our lovemaking after that. Hell, it wasn't even lovemaking, it was pure sex. However, she seemed content with how things were and never complained, though we rarely cuddled or had the tender conversations we used to have before the incident. It seemed like everything had settled into what I assumed was our new normal. However, 1 week each month, I hired a private investigator to follow her, just to make sure she was keeping her word and wasn't meeting Jackson, or anyone else, for that matter. I spent a lot of money for a little peace of mind. 6 years later, our youngest son, Terry, left to attend Michigan State University. Melissa was in her penultimate year at the University of Michigan, so when Terry made his decision, we spent the whole summer dealing with a small sibling rivalry before they both moved to their respective schools. Since Terry was a freshman, he lived in an on-campus dorm, and Tracy and I helped him move in a week before classes started. Neither Tracy nor I could remember taking even half as much stuff with us when we went off to college. On Thursday, we took him to Michigan State and spent nearly the entire weekend there. Late Sunday evening, we finally headed back home. Exactly 30 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I called both kids and quietly but calmly told them that I was divorcing their mother because she had cheated on me with another man several years ago. They were both devastated. "I thought you two were so good together. How could this happen?" Melissa practically shouted into the phone. "I always thought we were good together too," I replied. "But your mother cheated on me with Jackson Aloysius Fairchild 6 years ago when we were there with several other couples for the 4th of July weekend. She told me she was going to do it openly, so she wouldn't have to sneak around behind my back, and then she said she'd remain faithful to me for the rest of our lives. She didn't see it as cheating, but I did, and I told her then that I wouldn't stand for it. That if she went through with it, there would be consequences. But apparently, she and Jackson had planned it all along, and she told me that if I left her, she wouldn't just take half of our property, she'd take both of you as well. She said she'd turn you both against me. I couldn't risk losing the two of you, so I gave in and endured it until you both became adults. I was sure you'd understand. Terry spoke first. Damn it, he exclaimed. Did she give you any reason why she pulled this crap? Other than just wanting to have sex with a man she found attractive? Not really, I replied. She simply assumed I'd give in to avoid losing the two of you, and in some ways, she was right. Is she still messing around with other people, Dad? Melissa asked. As far as I can tell, no, sweetheart, I said. Since then, I've had a private investigator follow her 1 week a month, and as far as he can tell, she's kept her promise and hasn't cheated. Then why can't you forgive her, Dad? Terry asked hesitantly. You've been married for, 22 years. And she only did it once. Once was more than enough, Terry, I said, struggling to keep my growing anger in check. What kind of love did she have for me when she spent the night in another man's bed? What kind of respect did she show me when she had sex with him the next morning, and we could all hear what they were doing? I'm sorry, kids. I just don't have it in me to forgive her. I stayed with her to keep the family together. I love you both. Thanks, Dad. We really appreciate that you helped us stay together, Melissa replied. Does she already know? Terry asked. She'll find out in just a few minutes. She's being served at her office at 4 p.m. Dad, that's a bad move, Melissa said. In front of her boss and co-workers, she'll be crushed and humiliated. Don't do that to her, Dad. It's too late, sweetheart. Besides, I planned it that way on purpose. Her boss and his wife were among the others at the lake house when it happened, and if you think I wasn't humiliated enough, imagine how I felt the next morning when your mother started moaning while having sex with Jackson. I wanted to curl up and die. So, no, I absolutely want her to feel the pain of humiliation. Although I don't agree with this, Dad, I think I understand, Melissa replied. I agree, Dad. I fully support you, Terry chimed in. My phone rang at 4:07. Yes. I answered. I'm driving home right now, you bastard, and when I get there, I'm going to kick your ass for the next week, Tracy shouted into the phone. I was betting on remorse and tears. Just wanted to show you that I know, I replied before ending the call. I sat in the living room watching TV until I heard the garage door open and Tracy's car pull into the driveway. I turned off the TV and stood up. If she was planning to attack me, I wanted to be ready to defend myself. I had never hit a woman before, but I was prepared to do so if it came to that. As usual, Tracy came in through the utility room, looking like she was on fire. She marched straight toward me, but I shifted slightly to the right to prevent her from striking me in the groin with her right leg, which was her dominant one. It's an old fighter's trick. I also raised both hands in a defensive position. At that moment, Tracy stopped, looked me up and down as if trying to figure out how to hit me, and then collapsed onto the couch in tears. I thought we were fine. I thought we were fine, she mumbled. All these years, you never once said you'd divorce me. You thought everything was fine because you wanted it to be, I said calmly. But I kept my promise. I haven't slept with anyone since Jackson at the lake. And I never planned to sleep with anyone else again. You kept your promise. But 16 years ago, you made a vow to me that you threw in the trash that night. I told you not to do it, but you were going to anyway and even threatened to take my children away from me. I couldn't let you do that. And you had me served at the gallery, in front of Lou and all my colleagues. How could you be even more cruel, she rasped. I felt that having Lou present simply completed the circle you started at the lake house 6 years ago. And it was so brutal. The way you moaned in that house on Sunday morning was the most humiliating moment of my life. Rest assured, I've gotten my revenge. Tracy continued sobbing, but I could see an expression of understanding beginning to form on her face. 6 years ago, you told me that you thought sleeping with Jackson Aloysius Fairchild was worth it. That it was wonderful. Do you still feel that way now? But I kept my promise to you. I've been faithful to you for over 6 years since then, she whimpered. So what exactly is the limit of your promise? I quickly retorted. If your vow only lasted for 16 years, does your promise now extend for only half that time, say, 8 years? Bobby, I'm truly sorry if this incident leads to our divorce, but I told you about it. I didn't cheat. Yes, you did, I insisted. The fact that you told me about it in advance, instead of sneaking around behind my back, doesn't make it right. We didn't discuss it, you discussed it with him. We didn't agree to it, you agreed to it with him. And then you broke the vow you made to me. You regret the divorce it caused, but you don't regret your actions. You never regretted what you did. I didn't give you a pass to cheat. We didn't come to some sort of agreement that you could be with someone else. You just gave yourself permission and decided I would accept your idiotic decision. You broke my heart that weekend, Tracy, and on the way home, you told me it was my problem. That I had to deal with it, or you take my kids away. Does that sound like love to you? Because it sure doesn't to me. She just stared at me, stunned. Tracy found herself a good lawyer, and he convinced the judge that we needed family counseling. At the very first session, the counselor, a pretty young woman in her 30s, asked me why I thought I couldn't move past Tracy cheating on me just once, especially since she didn't sleep with Jackson behind my back. I looked at her as if she had two heads, then asked if she had ever been married, noticing she wasn't wearing any rings on her left hand. My marital status has no bearing on your answer, Mr. Sprague, she said, more defensive than necessary. Completely wrong answer, I said, standing up to leave. As I walked out, both women sat frozen. Later that evening, I got a call from Ron and Judy, Tracy's parents. I had always been very fond of them. My own parents had passed away several years earlier, and after their deaths, I had grown even closer to Ron and Judy. They genuinely reciprocated those feelings, but I knew they had to take their daughter's side in this matter. That's exactly what parents do. I hadn't spoken to them since Tracy was served her papers a few weeks ago. They were both on speakerphone. After exchanging pleasantries, Judy started the conversation. Bobby, why are you being so stubborn? She asked. You know Tracy loves you with all her heart. You know she kept her promise to never have sex with anyone else again. Why do you have to be so unyielding? What exactly did she tell you about that weekend? I asked. Well, dear, she told us that the two of you talked about her spending one night with some guy, and then she promised to be faithful to you for the rest of her life. She said she told you everything instead of sneaking around behind your back, as she could have, because she truly loves you and doesn't want to lose you. That's about half the story. Are you two sitting down? Say what you need to say, Bobby. We're sitting, her father replied curtly. We didn't agree that she could have sex with Jackson Aloysius Fairchild. She and Jackson made that agreement. I was told that I had no say in the matter. That it was going to happen, and if I wanted to make a fuss, she'd take the kids and turn them against me. I warned her not to do it, but it didn't change a damn thing. So, they had their fun that evening, and to make sure it stuck, they had more fun the next morning. We were all sitting in the living room until your daughter got too loud, and we moved to the backyard. I've never been so humiliated in my life, until Tracy told me on the way home how amazing the sex was. Does that sound like the words of a loving wife? Does it sound like a woman who actually cares about her husband? Because it doesn't to me. But you stayed with her for 6 more years, her father said. No. I stayed for my kids for 6 more years, and after a while, I even went back to your daughter, the cheater. But love? That night, love started to fade, and every day since, there's been less and less of it. I will never love her the way I once did. I heard Judy start to cry. I'm sorry, son. We didn't know the whole story, Ron said. We should have realized it would have been even worse for you if you had just walked away. Thank you for staying all those years for the sake of the kids. Tracy and her lawyer did everything they could to delay the process, and the divorce took about a year. I don't know, maybe Tracy thought I would lose the will to fight and just stay married. She should have known that wasn't going to happen. Although I didn't realize it at the time, being an active parent as my kids grew up really strengthened my standing in the community and gave me insight into the personal lives of some of the other parents. I got to know far more divorced people in my age group than I normally would have, and I used that knowledge to my advantage when my divorce finally became official. I started taking day trips or going to restaurants and dance clubs on weekends, and I almost always had interesting company. Many of them were divorced mothers of my kids' friends, while others were friends of friends. I guess the old saying about how you'll find it if you're looking turned out to be true. In fact, I ended up having more sex and more partners than I did before getting married. Life wasn't so bad, if you ignored the hole in my heart that Tracy had left behind. After the divorce, I moved into a 3-bedroom apartment because I wanted my kids to have a place where they could stay with me if they wanted to. I know that at first, after the divorce, they were angry with Tracy, but I thought they would eventually come to terms with it and maybe split their time between us until they moved out for good. For their sake, I hoped that they and Tracy would come to some sort of arrangement, but I wasn't going to mediate that deal. Tracy had wronged all 3 of us, and I wasn't about to try to bring her back into the kids' lives. While I wasn't surprised that both kids chose to stay with me during their college breaks, what surprised me most was how quickly Tracy's parents reconnected with me. I had barely heard from them during the court proceedings, which I completely understood, but about 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Judy called me and asked if I could meet her and Ron for dinner at a nice Italian restaurant in our city. Considering how well we had gotten along before the divorce, I didn't see any reason to refuse, and the 3 of us had a wonderful evening together. The evening began awkwardly, as Ron and Judy apologized for both Tracy's behavior and any hostility that might have arisen from their initial support of her, at least until they, so to speak, learned the rest of the story. I told them their apologies were accepted and that I understood their need to support their daughter. Then I asked if we could change the subject, and from that point on, the evening improved, despite the occasional comments and tears about what might have been. Ron and Judy's return to my life restored a sense of normalcy, and I think they enjoyed my company as much as I appreciated theirs. We rarely spoke about Tracy, except perhaps in passing when reminiscing about events from the past. We got together probably a couple of times a month while the kids were away at school, and when they were home, we spent even more time together. It was only a matter of time before I invited a 6th person to our little gatherings. Amy and I started dating about 18 months after the divorce. By then, I had already been on a few dates and wasn't actively searching for the right one when Amy and a few of her friends walked into the restaurant where my kids and I were having dinner on a Saturday evening. She and her 3 friends were seated just one table away from us, and although I didn't pay them much attention, my kids were quick to step up and seize the moment. "Dad, do you see those women who just sat down?" Melissa asked in a half-whisper. "They're all beautiful, and none of them are wearing wedding rings." "Oh, come on, Melissa, I don't need you to play matchmaker for me," I replied. "She's right, Dad. There's definitely some energy at that table," Terry added. I glanced over. The kids were right. "Damn. Maybe I do need you as my assistant," I said to Melissa. We finished our dinner. Since I was driving, I handed my car keys to Melissa and told the kids I'd find a taxi home. Then, I walked over and introduced myself to the lovely ladies at the table, who quickly invited me to join them. I sipped on Eagle Rare bourbon while they ate. "So, you ditched your kids to flirt with us? What kind of father are you?" asked Jennifer, a long-haired blonde sitting at the round table. I'm the kind of father who knows his kids have good taste, so when they pointed out that 3 of you aren't wearing wedding rings, I had 2 options: go home, watch a baseball game, and listen to those same kids give me endless grief, or maybe come over here, make a complete fool of myself, but at least earn a little more respect from my kids. And I've always been told it's just as easy to fall for a beautiful stepmom as it is for an unattractive one. Wow. Well, big guy, there's something about you, said the married brunette. Not a jerk, just a confident guy with 2 smart, chatty kids, and, I might add, good taste. So, does that make you the main host here? I replied. They all giggled, including Rose, whom I had been teasing. But for that, big guy, you'll need to share your story with the class first, she responded with a smile. I shared my life story with 4 nearly complete strangers, quickly summarizing my 17-year marriage and subsequent divorce. Not good enough, Romeo. If you're such a great guy, then why did your wife run away from you? Asked Angelica, a goddess with jet black hair. 3 of us here have been divorced already, so we want to know up front if it's even worth spending time talking to you. Straight to the point. I like that, I replied. For the first time since my divorce 2 years ago, I shared my entire story, even the most painful moments. Until that point, the only people who knew the full story were Tracy's parents and my divorce attorney. When I finished, an awkward silence filled the room. I noticed tears in everyone's eyes. Hell, even I had tears. Well, that's one way to break the ice, said Carol, touching my right hand. Apologies, ladies. I try not to dwell on the past. Look at it this way, I have 2 amazing kids, and my in-laws aren't so bad either. Your in-laws? You must be joking, Angelica gasped. Now you're really pushing the limits of my understanding. Nobody likes their in-laws, especially after a divorce. What can I say? I'm special. If you ladies are done eating, drinks are on me. It's my turn to hear your stories, I said. We sat there for another 3 hours as I listened to each of their stories. Jennifer had divorced because her husband was a serial cheater. Angelica's and Carol's marriages had ended due to irreconcilable differences. Rose, on the other hand, had been married for 26 years to the best husband in the world. She called him the best husband in the world several times, and every time she said it, the other 3 nodded in agreement. That's a man I need to meet. The women told me they had a monthly girls' night out, so my presence there was technically breaking the rules for Rose. But Rose suggested that if she could bring her husband to the next gathering, I could come too, if I wanted. The other 3 quickly agreed. Can I bring someone? I asked cheekily. A month later, the 6 of us met at the same restaurant. I was introduced to Sean, Rose's husband, and I left that evening thinking he really might be the best husband in the world. We hit it off right away. The 6 of us continued going out to eat together monthly, and I started spending time with the 3 single women as good friends. Sometimes the 4 of us would meet up, and other times, I'd go on a date with one of the women. A few of those dates ended with us having sex, sometimes making love, sometimes just sex. All of them were amazing in bed, no matter how we approached it, and I made sure each of them got everything they could from me, which always included what I enjoyed doing with a woman. I really liked it, and I think I'm pretty good at it. Judging by the moments of pure ecstasy I observed from all 3, I think the women enjoyed it a lot too. About a year later, Angelica and I became exclusive. I remained good friends with Jennifer and Carol, but everyone involved understood that exclusive meant exactly that, although, when the girls got together, the teasing could sometimes get a bit raunchy, even for me. My kids adjusted to Angelica pretty quickly. It took my in-laws a little longer to get used to her. I understood that and didn't push. Having a steady girlfriend meant their faint hope that Tracy and I might reconcile was quickly fading. But I think they saw the same things in Angelica that I did. Since I had such a strong bond with them, I figured it was only a matter of time before they felt comfortable with her and started explaining to her why I held them in such high regard. After Angelica had visited my in-laws half a dozen times, Judy pulled me aside and said we needed to talk. She looked as serious as a heart attack, so I got a little worried that my newfound family happiness was about to collapse. "Bobby, maybe I don't have the right to say this, but unfortunately for you, I'm going to say it anyway," she began. "How long have you been seeing this woman? Don't you think it's time to put a ring on her finger before someone else comes up with that brilliant idea?" I tried my best to match the serious expression on her face, but inside, I was smiling from ear to ear. When your ex-mother-in-law says something like that, well, I think she was right. "You're right, Mom. I need to lock this girl down." "I guess I've just been a little shy," I said. "Do it soon, big guy," she replied. About 6 weeks later, I took Angelica to a restaurant for her 47th birthday. I had suggested she dress up for the occasion, and I was delighted to see her version of a little black dress. Since Angelica couldn't get pregnant, she had never been through a pregnancy, and her body looked like that of a 35-year-old woman. Her breasts hadn't sagged, and her stomach was still toned. I knew she also spent a lot of time at the gym, so it wasn't just because she hadn't had children. The dress was about 15 centimeters above her knees and had a low neckline in the front, showing off her gorgeous cleavage. Heads turned all evening, and I barely managed to stop myself from drooling during dinner. We both ordered cheesecake for dessert, and our waiter returned with a tray holding 2 slices and a bottle of champagne. "We didn't order champagne," Angelica whispered to me. "No, we didn't." "I did," I whispered back. "It's for after I slip this ring onto your finger." After Judy spoke to me, I went to my favorite jeweler and asked him to craft a custom diamond engagement ring. I thought he did an excellent job. Apparently, Angelica did too, because when she saw the ring, she started crying. I'm pretty sure that among all the sobs, there was a yes. We had a simple spring wedding. Terry was my best man. Rose was Angelica's maid of honor. No, I didn't invite Tracy. Although I know it hurt Ron and Judy, I didn't consider my ex-wife a friend. We were only together when it involved the kids. When we were together, we had cordial interactions, but unlike some people who can move past divorce and become true friends, I couldn't do that. I couldn't forget the disrespect, and if you can't forget, I don't think you can truly forgive. My kids eventually forgave Tracy, and that's perfectly fine with me. She's their mother, but I don't ask about her, and the kids don't bring her up voluntarily. The same goes for Ron and Judy. Angelica seemed to get along well enough with Tracy when we were all together. I don't mind because Angelica is her own person and can choose her own friends. Again, it's not something we really talk about. After our wedding, we were together with Tracy twice, first at Melissa's wedding, and then at Terry's wedding. In both cases, I was a very proud father and wasn't going to let anything detract from those wonderful days spent with my kids. The grandkids started arriving a couple of years after the kids got married, and that's when I saw a side of Angelica I never expected. While Tracy and I were delighted to become grandparents, Grandma Angelica was absolutely over the moon. Apparently, she had a lot of maternal instincts that, so to speak, needed fulfilling, and the grandkids helped her with that. She was completely over the top. Tracy eventually remarried. Then got divorced again. Then married a third time. And divorced a third time. Angelica told me she thought Tracy was looking for another version of me but just couldn't find one. She wanted me to promise her that I would never leave her. I don't have to promise you that, I replied. I already made a vow to you.